He thought humiliation was leadership, but before that morning was over, every man on that field would learn the difference. The Academy Yard in South Fulton County was already heating up under the Georgia sun, even though it was barely past 8 in the morning, and the new recruits stood in long, rigid lines with their boots planted on the painted asphalt, their uniforms pressed sharp, their shoulders tight, and their eyes fixed forward like they had been told not just to listen, but to survive. The air smelled like dust, metal, and fresh coffee drifting from somewhere inside the administration building, and over all of it hung that strange silence that only lives in places built on rank, ego, and rules. At the center of that silence stood Officer Andre Coleman. He wasn't saying a word. His posture was calm, his expression unreadable, his dark uniform plain compared to the decorated command staff walking the perimeter, and if someone had arrived late and looked quickly, they might have assumed he was just another officer assigned to support orientation. That was exactly what Officer Travis Boone wanted them to think. Boone paced in front of the recruits with the swagger of a man who had been obeyed for too long. Tall, broad, loud in the way insecure men often are when they mistake volume for authority, he carried his voice like a weapon, throwing it across the field for everyone to hear. "You want to wear the badge?" he barked, turning sharply toward the recruits. "Then you better understand one thing right now. This job has no room for weakness." A few recruits stiffened. Others locked their jaws tighter. Boone let the words hang for a second, then swung around and pointed directly at Andre without warning, like he'd been waiting for the moment. "And this," he said with a smirk curling at the edge of his mouth, "is what happens when people confuse seniority with command presence." A murmur moved through the formation and died just as fast. Andre did not react. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't defend himself. He didn't offer Boone the satisfaction of a flinch. But Boone stepped closer anyway, feeding on the attention now gathering around him. "Stand up. Straight, Coleman," he snapped, though Andre was already standing straighter than anyone else on that yard. If recruits are going to learn what leadership looks like, they ought to learn what it doesn't look like too. There it was. Not just correction. Not just disrespect. A public performance. The kind designed to shrink a man in front of witnesses. The kind meant to send a message without ever needing to say the ugliest part out loud. And the recruits felt it. Some stared harder at the horizon, pretending not to hear. A few exchanged brief glances they immediately regretted. One young woman in the second row, Emma Brooks, narrowed her eyes just slightly, not at Andre, but at Boone, as if she already sensed something was off about the way this was unfolding. Andre remained still, calm, silent. His eyes passed once over the formation, not with fear, not with shame, but with the quiet control of someone taking measure of a room before speaking in it. That was what Boone missed. That was what all men like Boone missed. They thought composure meant weakness because they had never learned what real discipline looked like. Boone circled him once, slow and theatrical, talking now more to the recruits than to Andre himself. "Some officers," he said, "get too comfortable thinking a patch and a few years on payroll make them untouchable. Out here, respect is earned." The words landed hard, and for one suspended second, the whole yard seemed to hold its breath. Andre lowered his gaze just enough to glance at Boone's hand, then at the clipboard tucked under his own arm, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, and so controlled it cut cleaner than shouting ever could. "You should remember this moment," he said, and somehow that made the silence even heavier. The words settled over the academy yard like heat rising off blacktop, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Officer Travis Boone smiled as if he had just made his point, as if the lesson of the morning had already been delivered, and all that was left was for the recruits to absorb it. Around him, the formation stayed rigid, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the obedient stillness of a training exercise. It was the kind of silence people fall into when they know they have just witnessed something they are not supposed to question, even when every instinct tells them they should. Boone took 2 slow steps back, clasped his hands behind him, and scanned the rows with the confidence of a man certain the field belonged to him. "You see that?" he said, raising his chin toward Andre without even looking at him. "That is what hesitation looks like. That is what happens when somebody forgets this profession is built on command, not comfort." A few recruits shifted almost invisibly, the kind of movement that happens when bodies stay still but thoughts do not. Emma Brooks felt it in the line beside her, the tension moving from shoulder to shoulder like an electric current with nowhere to go. She kept her face forward, but her eyes tracked just enough to catch Andre in her peripheral vision. He still had not moved. No anger. No protest. No need to prove anything. There was something unsettling about that kind of stillness, not because it looked weak, but because it did not. Boone, meanwhile, kept talking. He thrived in rooms where nobody interrupted him. He liked the sound of his own certainty, the easy rhythm of ridicule disguised as instruction. A badge does not make a leader, he said. Anybody can put on a uniform. Anybody can stand there and act like they belong. Leadership is presence. It is force. It is the ability to make people fall in line the second you speak. The last sentence came out louder than the rest, aimed less at the recruits now and more at the administration building across the yard, where tinted windows reflected the morning sun in hard white strips. Boone wanted an audience. He wanted witnesses. He wanted every person on that field to remember who had control. But control has a way of exposing itself when it is forced too hard, and somewhere behind the recruits, just beyond the chain-link fence near the parking lot, a black county vehicle rolled in and stopped without sirens, without drama, without drawing attention from anyone except those who knew what to look for. Andre noticed it. He did not turn his head. He did not need to. Emma noticed something too, though she could not yet name it. Two senior instructors near the equipment table had gone strangely quiet. One of them lowered the clipboard in his hand. The other straightened his posture like a man caught standing too casually in church. Boone did not see any of it. He was too busy enjoying himself. "Coleman," he called, voice sharp again. "Since you want everybody remembering this moment, why do not you help me out? Show these recruits the difference between carrying rank and earning respect." The words landed with a smug finality, and for the first time Andre lifted his head fully, not toward Boone, but toward the rows of recruits. He looked at them one by one, as if he were memorizing faces, as if this mattered far more than the humiliation Boone was trying to stage. When he spoke, his voice was measured and clean, the kind that did not need volume to carry. "Respect is never taken from the weak," he said. "It is surrendered by the careless." Boone laughed under his breath, a short, dismissive sound, but it did not land the way he expected. Not this time, because now the recruits were not just listening to him. They were watching Andre, and somewhere in the distance, the heavy glass doors of the administration building had just opened. The doors opened with the slow authority of a moment no one on that field had prepared for, and just like that the rhythm of the morning changed. It did not happen with raised voices or hurried footsteps. It happened in silence, the kind that moves ahead of power before power ever speaks. 3 members of Academy administration stepped out first, followed by Deputy Chief Harold Benton in full dress uniform, his silver badge catching the sun in sharp flashes that forced more than one recruit to blink. The moment Boone saw him, the easy swagger in his shoulders tightened by half an inch. It was small. Most people would have missed it. Andre did not. Emma Brooks did not either. Benton was not scheduled to be there. Everyone knew that. Men at his level did not walk onto a training yard at 8 in the morning unless something important was already in motion. Boone turned quickly, his expression rearranging itself into something cleaner, more official, more controlled. The recruits snapped their eyes forward as if the entire field had just remembered it belonged to someone higher. Even the wind seemed to back off for a second, leaving only the faint rustle of flags near the main entrance and the distant hum of traffic beyond the perimeter fence. Benton stopped at the front of the formation, hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable in the bright Georgia light. 2 senior instructors positioned themselves off to the side, both suddenly formal, both careful not to look at Andre too long. Boone stepped toward the deputy chief and gave a crisp greeting, the kind polished by habit and performed for effect. "Deputy Chief Benton, sir. We are in the middle of orientation drills." Benton let the words sit. Then his gaze moved past Boone and landed on Andre Coleman. It was not a casual glance. It was the kind of look men give when they already know exactly who belongs where. Boone kept talking, trying to stay ahead of whatever was unfolding. "I was just demonstrating command presence for the incoming class," he said, forcing a dry confidence into his tone. "Trying to show them standards early. Imagine standing there and feeling the whole morning tilt beneath you without yet knowing why. Imagine realizing that the man you had spent the last 10 minutes diminishing had not once acted surprised, not once acted uncertain, not once asked for mercy from the moment you called him out. Boone was still speaking, but the field had stopped listening to him. Benton took one step forward, then another, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, deep, and impossible to mistake. "That is interesting," he said, "because what I just witnessed looked less like standards and more like theater." The words did not come fast. They did not need to. They spread across the yard with the weight of a closing door. Boone opened his mouth, then closed it. A recruit near the back swallowed hard. Emma felt the hair rise on her arms beneath the stiff academy fabric. Benton turned fully toward Andre now, and something shifted in the faces of the command staff standing near the building. Not surprise. Recognition. Respect. Andre met the deputy chief's eyes with the same quiet composure he had worn all morning. No relief. No visible emotion. Only that same discipline that had unsettled everyone from the beginning. Benton reached into the folder one of the administrators carried behind him and withdrew a document printed on heavy county letterhead. The paper itself was ordinary, but the way every eye followed it made it feel like a verdict. Boone stared at it for half a second too long. Somewhere inside the ranks, one recruit whispered under his breath before catching himself. Andre said nothing. He only adjusted the clipboard under his arm, as though he had been waiting not for permission, but for timing. Then Benton lifted his chin toward the formation and said, "All recruits, stand by for official introduction." And in that instant, Officer Travis Boone understood, before the words were even spoken, that the man he had tried to make small was about to become impossible to ignore. For one long second, nobody moved. The recruits stood locked in formation under the growing heat, their faces disciplined but their eyes alive now, because everyone could feel the same thing pressing down on that yard at once. Something had shifted, and it had shifted hard. Deputy Chief Harold Benton unfolded the letter in his hand with slow precision, not rushed, not theatrical, just certain. The paper made a faint, crisp sound in the silence, and somehow even that seemed louder than Boone had sounded all morning. Officer Travis Boone kept his chin up, but the confidence that had carried him an hour ago was no longer clean. It had turned brittle. The kind of brittle men get when they realize the room they thought belonged to them has started answering to somebody else. Benton looked across the formation first, making sure every recruit was listening, and when he spoke, his voice carried like a command that had never once needed to repeat itself. "Effective immediately," he said, "Captain Andre Coleman has been appointed commanding officer of the South Fulton County Academy Reform and Field Readiness Unit. Beginning today, he assumes oversight of instructor conduct, recruit development, curriculum enforcement, and internal accountability standards for this academy." The words landed one piece at a time, each one heavier than the last. Captain, commanding officer, oversight, accountability. It was not just a promotion. It was authority with reach. Real reach. The kind that changed how every conversation on that yard would sound from now on. A silence followed, so complete it felt almost unreal, as though the field itself had forgotten how to breathe. Emma Brooks felt her heartbeat in her throat. Two recruits in the back row stared forward so hard it looked painful. One of the senior instructors lowered his eyes, and Boone, still standing a few feet from Andre, looked for the first time like a man trying to catch up to a train that had already left the station. Andre did not smile. He did not savor the moment. He did not turn toward Boone with triumph in his face. That was what made it hit even harder. He simply stepped forward when Benton angled the document toward him, accepted it with one measured hand, and nodded once. Calm, steady, unmoved by spectacle. He had not endured the morning because he was powerless. He had endured it because he understood power better than anyone else on that yard. Benton turned slightly toward the recruits. "This appointment follows a county review of academy performance, training failures, and multiple concerns regarding leadership culture," he said. "Captain Coleman has been assigned to rebuild standards from the ground up." Leadership culture. The phrase hung in the air like a mirror nobody wanted to look into. Boone shifted his weight, small and quick, but impossible to miss now. The same recruits he had used as an audience were still standing there. Only now they were witnessing something far more serious than a public correction. They were watching character get measured in real time. Andre finally faced them fully, his dark uniform plain no longer, because rank has a way of changing shape, when truth catches up to it. The morning light touched the silver bars at his collar, and several recruits noticed them for the first time, as if they had been invisible until this exact second. Boone had spent the entire morning trying to define the man standing beside him. Now the man was being introduced by the only voice on that field that mattered. Benton looked at Boone then, and while his face remained controlled, the disappointment in his eyes was impossible to hide. "Officer Boone," he said, "you will remain on the field." It was not loud. It did not need to be. Every recruit understood that sentence meant this was not over. Not by a long shot. Andre slid the appointment letter into the clipboard under his arm and took one step toward the center line of the formation. The recruits straightened instinctively. Not because he had shouted, not because he had demanded it, but because authority had finally walked out into the open, and now everyone could see what it looked like. Captain Andre Coleman let the silence do what shouting never could. It moved across the academy yard in a slow, undeniable wave, settling over the recruits, the instructors, the administration staff, and finally over Officer Travis Boone, who now stood where he had placed others all morning, exposed not by force but by the simple fact that the truth had arrived on schedule. The Georgia sun had climbed higher, and heat shimmered above the blacktop in thin silver ripples, but no one on that field seemed to notice anymore. Every eye was fixed on Andre. Every thought was catching up to what had just happened. The man Boone had tried to reduce in front of fresh recruits was not just another officer in the chain. He was the chain now. Andre glanced once at the appointment letter tucked beneath his clipboard, then lifted his gaze across the rows of recruits with the same steady calm that had unsettled Boone from the beginning. "At ease," he said, and the command came out low and clean, not loud, not theatrical. Yet the entire formation responded with the instinctive precision of people who knew the difference between noise and leadership the second they heard it. Boots shifted, shoulders loosened by a fraction. The tension did not disappear, but it changed shape. It was no longer fear of embarrassment. It was attention, real attention. Andre took one slow step forward. "This morning," he said, "you were supposed to learn about command presence." He let the words hang for a second, his eyes moving over the class, resting nowhere long enough to shame anyone, but long enough to make every recruit feel seen. "Instead, you witnessed something more useful. You witnessed what happens when authority is confused with performance." Nobody moved. Even the flags near the building seemed to lift and settle more quietly. Emma Brooks felt a chill move down her arms despite the heat. She had come to the academy ready for strict rules, hard days, and long hours. She had expected pressure. She had expected discipline. But she had not expected the first real lesson to come wrapped in silence and dignity instead of volume. Andre continued, his tone measured, his words chosen with care. "You will meet officers in your careers who think control is something you display by making another person smaller. You will meet supervisors who mistake intimidation for standards. And if you do not learn early how to tell the difference, you will spend your entire career saluting the wrong kind of strength." Somewhere in the second row, a recruit swallowed hard. Another stared at the ground for one beat too long before forcing his eyes back up. Andre did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Each word landed with the weight of a truth no one could unhear now that it had been spoken out loud. Deputy Chief Benton stepped back and said nothing, allowing the moment to belong entirely to the man he had just placed in command. That, more than anything, sent the message home. Boone remained on the field exactly where he had been told to stay. His face tightened into an expression that could not decide whether to become apology, anger, or disbelief. But Andre did not look at him yet. That was another lesson. Leadership did not chase humiliation. It outgrew it. "This academy is under review for a reason," Andre said. "From this point forward, every instructor will be measured by conduct, not volume. Every recruit will be judged by discipline, not by who flatters the loudest voice in the room. And every badge represented on this field will answer to one standard only." He paused there, just long enough for the heat, the quiet, and the meaning of those words to settle into every chest on that yard. Then he turned, finally, toward Boone. Not with cruelty, not with triumph, just with the calm finality of a man who had no interest in revenge, because responsibility was already heavier than revenge could ever be. "Officer Boone," he said, "you spoke a great deal this morning about earning respect." Boone straightened instinctively, But the reflex came too late to hide anything now. Andre held his gaze, not hard, not hostile, simply steady. From this moment on, he said, you will have the opportunity to learn what that actually means. Officer Travis Boone looked like a man standing in a room that had suddenly changed shape around him. The posture was still there. The pressed uniform was still there. The rigid jaw, the squared shoulders, the habit of authority sitting on him like it had been tailored into his skin were still there too. But something underneath all of it had cracked, and everybody on that field could see it now. Not because Captain Andre Coleman had humiliated him. Andre had done the opposite. He had left Boone standing in the full light of his own behavior, and sometimes that is a far harsher thing. The recruits felt it before they understood it. The academy yard, which only minutes earlier had sounded like the controlled chaos of orientation day, had gone so quiet that even the buzz of the overhead speakers near the administration building seemed intrusive. Somewhere beyond the fence, a truck downshifted on the road. Somewhere above them, a flag rope tapped softly against a steel pole. But on that blacktop, under that heat, all the noise that mattered had already burned away. Andre took one more step toward the center of the formation and rested the clipboard against his side. He had not raised his voice once that morning. He had not defended himself when he was provoked. He had not tried to win the crowd. He had simply waited for the truth to arrive, and now that it had, the whole field was being forced to reckon with what patience looks like when it belongs to someone who has carried more than disrespect and still learned to stand straight beneath it. A reform unit is not built to protect appearances, Andre said, his voice even, his eyes moving across the class. It is built to examine them. The sentence fell with quiet weight, and more than one recruit felt the meaning of it settle deeper than anything written in the academy handbook. Andre turned slightly, enough to include the instructors gathered near the equipment table. That includes me. That includes every supervisor on this field. And it includes every officer who thinks public embarrassment is the same thing as discipline. No one glanced at Boone now. They did not have to. The morning itself had become the evidence. Deputy Chief Harold Benton remained still near the front, his silence deliberate, almost ceremonial. He was not there to rescue anyone from consequences. He was there to mark the beginning of them. Andre looked back at the recruits, and his expression did not harden, but it sharpened. You are at the beginning of your careers, he said. That means you are also at the beginning of your habits. Pay attention to what you copy. Pay attention to what kind of officer makes you feel afraid to fail, and what kind of officer teaches you how to recover when you do. One of those builds character. The other builds silence. Emma Brooks felt those words like a hand against a door she had not realized was opening inside her. Around her, the class stood completely still, but the stillness was no longer passive. It had become reflective. Some recruits were replaying the morning in their heads. Some were trying to make peace with the fact that they had watched Boone's behavior and said nothing. Some were realizing for the first time that integrity is not always loud enough to announce itself before it is tested. Andre let the silence linger, then turned his full attention to Boone. Not with anger, not with pity, with expectation. Officer Boone, he said, from this point forward, you will report directly to my office pending review of your conduct on the training field and your instructional record over the last 18 months. The words hit like a sealed door closing. Boone blinked once, his face draining not of color, but of certainty. 18 months. That meant this was not about one bad morning. This meant records, complaints, patterns, things noticed, documented, stored away until the right moment arrived. Imagine realizing that while you were busy performing power, someone else had already been measuring its cost. Andre did not stop there. You will remain on duty until that review begins, he said. But you will not address this recruit class again without my authorization. It was clean, final, no spectacle, no shouting, just a boundary drawn so clearly that nobody could pretend not to see it. And as the words settled over the yard, Boone finally understood what the recruits were understanding too. Leadership had not arrived when the deputy chief stepped onto the field. Leadership had been standing there all morning, calm under pressure, watching, remembering, and waiting for the moment when truth would no longer need an introduction. The words did not echo, but they stayed. They stayed in the heat rising off the blacktop, in the stiff shoulders of the recruits, in the tight silence hanging between the instructors, and most of all in the expression Officer Travis Boone could no longer quite control. He had built his authority on the assumption that nobody would ever stop him in public, that nobody would ever interrupt the performance once it had begun, and now here he was, standing on the same field where he had tried to shrink another man, unable to escape the fact that every eye on that yard had seen the difference between command and character. Captain Andre Coleman did not press the moment. That was another thing the recruits noticed. He could have turned the field into a courtroom. He could have made Boone answer for every smug remark in front of the whole class. He could have fed the humiliation back to the man who had started it. Instead, he let the line he had already drawn remain enough. Real authority does not need to decorate consequences. It simply enforces them. Andre shifted the clipboard in his hand and looked back over the formation. The morning sun sat higher now, turning the academy windows into bright white mirrors, and in those hard reflections the yard looked almost unreal, as if the place itself were being forced to examine its own face. Today was meant to be your first lesson in field discipline, Andre said. It still will be. But now it is going to be an honest one. The recruits listened with a focus that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with awakening. Emma Brooks could feel it all around her. The class that had arrived expecting rules and routines was receiving something harder and far more valuable. They were being shown how an institution reveals itself, not when things run smoothly, but when someone believes the uniform gives them permission to forget another person's dignity. Andre walked slowly along the front line of the formation, not pacing, not performing, simply making himself visible to every recruit there. You will spend the next several months being tested, he said. Your endurance will be tested. Your judgment will be tested. Your discipline will be tested when you are tired, when you are embarrassed, when somebody wants a reaction from you because they think reaction proves weakness. Listen carefully. Losing your composure is not the only way to lose control. Sometimes the greater failure is mistaking someone else's silence for surrender. A small breeze moved across the yard, carrying the faint smell of cut grass from somewhere beyond the fence, and for the first time that morning the recruits seemed less like a class being managed and more like witnesses being entrusted with something. Boone remained where he was, quiet now. The earlier swagger drained out of him by the sheer weight of being unable to interrupt what came next. Deputy Chief Harold Benton finally stepped in, but only to reinforce the line already set. Captain Coleman's appointment is effective as of 0800 hours, he said. Any resistance to his authority will be treated as resistance to this department's reform directive. Reform directive. The phrase landed like a stamped seal on an envelope nobody could return unopened. So this was bigger than one promotion. Bigger than one field exercise. Bigger even than Boone. This was the county drawing a line through old habits and assigning a man it trusted to hold that line. Andre stopped at the center of the formation and faced the recruits again. Some of you came here believing leadership would be obvious, he said. A loud voice. A hard stare. A reputation. Maybe even fear. But fear is a shortcut. It gets obedience fast and respect never. What you choose to follow in this profession will shape the kind of officer you become when nobody important is watching. The words settled deep. Emma felt her throat tighten, not with sadness, but with the strange clarity that comes when something inside you gets named before you knew how to describe it. Around her, the rest of the class stood motionless, yet the field no longer felt frozen. It felt reset. Andre turned once more toward Boone, and when he spoke again, his voice remained calm, but there was steel in it now, unmistakable and earned. Officer Boone, you will submit your training logs, evaluation notes, and recruit contact records to my office by noon. Noon. Just a few hours away. Not someday. Not after rumors cooled off. Today. The same day he had chosen to make a spectacle of another man. Boone swallowed once and answered, "Yes, sir." And the sound of it moved across the yard like a door closing on an old order. Andre gave one nod, then faced the class. "Good," he said. "Now let us begin your real first day." The academy yard did not return to normal after that. It became something else. The recruits could feel it in the way the air sat differently around them, in the way conversations died before they started, in the way even the instructors seemed newly aware of their own posture. A place that had spent the morning rewarding noise was now being ruled by clarity, and clarity has a way of making everyone suddenly conscious of what they have said, what they have laughed at, and what they have allowed to pass as routine. Captain Andre Coleman stood at the front of the formation with the kind of quiet control that made the entire space reorganize itself around him. He did not pace. He did not posture. He simply occupied the ground as though it had always been his to steady. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice carrying across the rows without strain. "Your first day in this academy is not just about physical training, policy memorization, or procedure. It is about the habits you will build when you are given authority over another human being. That begins now." The words settled into the recruits with a weight none of them had expected when they woke up that morning. Emma Brooks stood in the second row, shoulders squared, eyes forward, but inside she could feel everything rearranging. She had come here believing the profession would be difficult because of its demands. She had not yet understood it would also be difficult because of the choices people made while wearing the same uniform. Andre let his gaze move across the formation. "Some of you were uncomfortable this morning," he said. "That matters. Hold on to that feeling. Do not bury it just because a louder voice tells you discomfort is weakness. Discomfort can be conscience. It can be the moment your character asks whether you are becoming the kind of officer this badge actually deserves." Several recruits lowered their eyes for a fraction of a second before bringing them back up. No one wanted to be singled out, but that was the point. Andre was not speaking to one person. He was speaking to everyone who had witnessed what happened and now had to decide what kind of silence they would carry out of it. Deputy Chief Harold Benton gave a brief nod, then stepped aside completely, leaving the field in Andre's hands in a way that required no announcement. The transfer of authority was no longer symbolic. It was operational. Andre turned toward the cluster of instructors near the equipment table. "Sergeant Molina," he said, and a middle-aged Latina instructor with a clean stance and sharp eyes stepped forward immediately. "You will take over the remainder of orientation logistics." "Yes, sir," she answered without hesitation. Andre then looked at Boone. The field seemed to tighten again, not with fear this time, but with expectation. Boone stood still, his face controlled by effort now rather than confidence. "Officer Boone," Andre said, "effective immediately, you are removed from direct recruit instruction pending administrative review. You will report to the records office, submit your training materials, and remain available for interview." It was not dramatic. It was definitive. No raised voice. No public dismantling. Just structure. Just consequence shaped into procedure. And somehow that made it hit harder. The recruits watched Boone absorb the words. Watched him understand that the role he had used to elevate himself over others had just been taken from him in the same clear daylight where he had tried to use it for display. He answered after a pause that was just long enough for everyone to feel it. "Yes, sir." Andre held his gaze for one beat longer, then nodded once and moved on, because the lesson was bigger than Boone now. "The rest of you," he said, facing the recruits, "need to understand what just happened. This was not punishment for personality. This was not a disagreement in style. This was a failure in judgment, professionalism, and respect. If you carry that failure into the street, someone else pays for it. That is why standards exist before the damage happens, not after." The yard stayed silent, but it was the silence of people listening from the inside now. Emma felt the truth of that in her chest. Around her, the class stood a little straighter, not because they had been barked into shape, but because they had just watched what real accountability looked like. Andre lifted the clipboard, glanced once at the schedule, and then looked back up with the same calm focus that had held all morning together. "Hydration break in 10 minutes, he said. "After that, we start Ethics Block 1, Chain of Command, and Field Judgment. If you came here expecting an easy version of this job, today is your correction. If you came here ready to become trustworthy, your training begins now." 10 minutes later, the recruits returned from the hydration break with water still cooling their throats and the morning sun now high enough to bleach the edges of the training yard in white heat. But the field did not feel like it had earlier. Something fundamental had changed. The laughter was gone. The casual smirks were gone. Even the instructors who remained on the perimeter seemed more careful with their faces, more aware that every gesture now carried meaning. Sergeant Elena Molina took position near the equipment table with a tablet in hand, already reorganizing the day's schedule under Captain Andre Coleman's direction, while Deputy Chief Harold Benton stood near the administration walkway, speaking quietly with two command staff members before finally stepping back entirely. The message was unmistakable. This was Andre's field now, and the recruits felt it most not in what he said next, but in how he stood before saying anything at all. He gave them a moment. Just a moment. Enough for the sounds around them to come back into focus. The flutter of the flag above the main building. The hum of the air conditioning units. The distant roll of traffic beyond the fence. The rustle of notebook pages in uncertain hands. Then he looked at them with that same steady gaze that had held all morning together and said, "The easiest thing in this profession is to look like you belong in it. The hardest thing is to deserve the trust that comes with it." No one shifted. No one looked away. Emma Brooks felt those words land somewhere deeper than instruction. Around her, the rest of the class stood in disciplined silence. But now it was a chosen silence, not the silence of people afraid to be noticed. Andre walked slowly across the front rank, not pacing to dominate the space, but moving with the kind of control that made every recruit follow him without realizing they were doing it. You will learn statutes. You will learn report writing. You will learn defensive positioning, radio procedure, traffic stops, and courtroom conduct. All of that matters. But none of it will save your character if your character is the first thing you trade away for approval, ego, or the comfort of fitting into the wrong crowd. The words settled over the yard with the weight of something older than policy, something harder to fake. A few recruits blinked against the glare. One lowered his chin slightly, not in shame exactly, but in reflection. Andre stopped at center again. "Some of you watched this morning and stayed quiet," he said. "I noticed. That does not make you guilty. It makes you responsible for what you do with what you learned. Imagine standing there at the beginning of your career and realizing your real test was never going to start after graduation. It had already started before breakfast." Andre let that thought breathe for a moment before continuing. "In this academy, silence will not be used to protect misconduct. Familiarity will not excuse disrespect. Volume will not replace integrity. And no recruit under my command will be taught that another person's dignity is optional depending on rank, race, frustration, or audience." There it was. Clear. Unflinching. Not delivered with anger, but with moral certainty. The kind that leaves no room for misunderstanding. On the far side of the yard, Officer Travis Boone crossed toward the records building under Sergeant Molina's instruction, his steps measured, his face unreadable from a distance, yet the image itself said enough. The same man who had tried to define the morning now looked like a footnote to it. Andre did not turn to watch him leave. He did not need to. He was too focused on the people still in front of him, the ones whose habits were still forming, the ones who still had a choice. "This badge," he said, touching 2 fingers lightly to his chest for the briefest second, "does not exist to make you feel bigger. It exists to make you more accountable. The day you forget that is the day you become dangerous in ways policy cannot fix fast enough." Emma felt a tightness rise in her throat, not from fear, but from the weight of hearing someone say aloud what the uniform should have meant all along. Andre looked across the formation one final time, seeing not just a class, but a set of futures still undecided. Then his voice lowered slightly, and because it lowered, every recruit leaned into it without moving a muscle. "This morning, some of you saw a man try to use a badge like a spotlight," he said. "By noon, you saw what the badge really is. Not a shield for insecurity, not a costume for pride, a promise. And promises are measured by how you treat people when there is nothing to gain from doing the right thing." The yard held that silence like a church holds prayer. No one wanted to break it. Finally, Andre lifted the clipboard, gave a short nod, and said, "Class, welcome to the academy." Then he paused once more, just long enough for the words to sink in before delivering the line they would remember long after the heat, the schedule, and the first day had faded. "The badge did not reveal who mattered here," he said. "It revealed who was ready to lead."